Hey guys, welcome to the AP Biology Screencast. Today's topic is going to be topic 1.1, which is the structure of water and hydrogen bonding. I want to take a moment just to check our learning target for this particular topic. If you don't take time to slow down and really look at what the goal is connected to this topic, you won't be able to understand what it is that the College Board expects us to be able to know and be able to do. And so it's important for you to self-assess your progress toward this topic during the course of your lesson. And it's also important for you to think about, how can I show what I know? How can I make my understanding visible to my teacher so that I can get feedback, or visible to other people so I can learn from my classmates and get valuable feedback from my classmates as well. I'm going to start by modeling how I would suggest breaking apart or dissecting that learning target every single day. If I read the target, it says, I can explain how water's polarity and associated properties relate to sustaining life on Earth. So I'm first taking a look at the verb. The verb says explain, so I know I'm going to have to provide an explanation, and so then I'm going to look deeper. What is the explanation going to have to include? And it looks like it's going to have to be an explanation about some kind of relationship, how something relates to something else. So the first something is going to be water's polarity and properties. And what do I want to relate that to? I want to relate it to how it sustains life on Earth, because those two things obviously are linked together based on this target. If you're unfamiliar with water's polarity, I'm actually going to start this screencast with a recap of that concept in case some of my students aren't familiar with that topic from maybe their freshman level biology class. And so if you are proficient in understanding water's polarity and understanding how water is structured, you're welcome to skip ahead during that portion of the screencast. Okay, something else I noticed when I look at this target is it looks like there's a lengthy list, checklist underneath the target. If I read the target again, I'm probably going to be able to see that that is a list of the associated water properties. These are all the water properties. So you might be asking yourself, do I need to know about all of those? Well, the course exam description put out by the College Board for AP Biology directly lists cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension. So that tells me that those are non-negotiables. Those are things that we absolutely need to integrate. I have, however, even though I don't see these necessarily in a list format, I see these topics embedded as well in many of the free response and multiple choice questions. So I feel like students need the exposure for these. Myself as a teacher, I'm going to try to give my students some freedom. So if I gave you a free response question on this topic, I would not expect you to write about all 7 of them, but instead maybe 3 or 4 is a good start. Please keep in mind those first 3 are listed by the College Board as absolutes, and then you can kind of select the ones that maybe are easier or make the most meaningful connection you to talk about on the list, but we do need to be familiar with all of them. Okay, I'm going to jump right in, I think, on our next slide. Here we go. Let me advance the slide here. Okay, structure of water. I've actually got some magnetic water cups that I can pause the video and go grab and let you kind of see those in just a moment. But just to get us started, if I were to ask students, what do you know about water? A lot of times students will respond with water is wet, and I'll get into a conversation of is it or is it not. But then usually after that, someone will say, well, I think of H2O. I know water's formula is H2O. So this model is just modeling that and showing that there is one oxygen atom compared to the 2 hydrogen atoms that make up water structure. If I break it apart further and show that there is 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogen atoms, I know that every single atom of every element has what we call subatomic particles. So that can include protons, neutrons, and electrons. And I'm going to focus specifically on the electrons. The electrons are found in this outermost energy level, and they are in constant motion. So you'll see this negatively charged electron that is circling around the hydrogen atom. And the motion of those electrons are actually a source of energy. It's why electronics work, and it's also why our nervous system functions, and it also contributes to cell respiration and photosynthesis, so it's kind of a big deal. Okay, on the outside of the hydrogen atoms, you'll notice they have one valence electron or one electron on its outermost energy level. Our oxygen atom actually has 6 valence electrons on its outermost energy level. It could hold 2 more. So I have highlighted the positions where those electrons could combine forces. So the hydrogen atom on one side is going to combine to the oxygen atom, and the same thing's happening on the other. And so bonds have formed in these locations where electrons are being shared. Now I'm looking around for a pen because I kind of like to use something like a pen for an example. I might just grab here we go. I was going to say I could grab an expo marker, but let's imagine this is an electron and this atom is sharing it with this atom. They're both kind of holding on to it. So the fact that they're sharing the electron is why we call it a covalent bond. So there's 2 covalent bonds holding this water molecule together. In addition to referring to this bond as a covalent bond, we also need to know that it is a polar covalent bond. So when we use the word polar, it's referencing the fact that even though this electron is being shared, it's not being shared equally. So there's this tug of war that's taking place back and forth. And just to be honest, the oxygen is going to win on this one because it is greedy for electrons. It pulls that electron closer to its nucleus than the hydrogen atoms do. So as a result, because the oxygen is a little bit more greedy, electronegative, it's going to have a slightly negative charge because, again, it's pulling that negative electron closer to it than toward the hydrogen. As a result, you'll notice that hydrogen atoms have a positive side on them. So just in summary, to make sure we're okay on the recap, water's neutral, but a water molecule has slightly charged ends. And on one side of the water molecule, it's slightly positive. On the other side, it's slightly negative. That's why we refer to it as a polar molecule. So when you think of what is water, water is polar. It is a polar molecule held together by polar covalent bonds. Okay, moving from, before I move to where I thought we were going, I forgot to put this slide in here. This slide, even though it's a little fuzzy, was a reminder for me to describe to you a phrase that someone shared with me last year, and I shared it with my students, and it's just something that ended up being repeated over the course of the semester and the year, and I think is really important. And so the phrase is, all models are wrong, some are useful. And that might sound really weird to begin with, that all models are wrong, but truthfully, they probably are, meaning there's some kind of inaccuracy in the model. It's not exactly like the real thing it's representing. If it was exactly like it, we would have just had the real thing in person. But sometimes we make models because something's either too small to see with our own eyes, or too large, or too expensive, too time-consuming. So models are made to represent some of the real objects or the ideas that people have. And so those models aren't perfect. That's why we say they're all wrong. Doesn't mean that there's not a reason to use them. They all have some imperfections or limitations, but some are more useful than others. So I just wonder if this picture right here is a more useful model than the one I built, because it actually shows the orientation of these hydrogen atoms at a different angle than how I showed it. And I kind of think this one is a little bit more accurate. It looks more like what students call the Mickey Mouse water molecule than the way I had them, like on either side. Anyway, all models are wrong, some are useful. Okay. Moving forward, now that we've kind of got a concept of why water is considered polar, let's just make sure that we understand polarity. Water is considered polar because it has one side that's slightly negatively charged and one side that's slightly positively charged. That occurs because of the unequal sharing of electrons. Now, moving into a completely different type of bond, instead of talking about polar covalent bonds, I want to talk to you about hydrogen bonds. So we're going to talk about what they are and what they're not. So to start with, a hydrogen bond occurs between a positive hydrogen and a negatively charged substance. Usually that substance is going to be oxygen or nitrogen, but it doesn't have to be. These are really weak bonds, but they are among the most important bonds in biology, and they will be repetitive in our course. So here's a picture of what a hydrogen bond is not. Please do not associate a hydrogen bond with one water molecule because it's not there. Instead, those are polar covalent bonds within one water molecule. A hydrogen bond is going to be between water molecules. We represent these with 3 little dots typically in most of the illustrations you'll see within textbooks and online. And so this just represents that attraction between the positive hydrogen on one water molecule and the negative substance it's attracted to on the opposite side, because opposite charges are attracted to one another. Okay, I paused so I could go grab one of my water cups, and so I've got them here. 3D Molecular makes some really cool water kits, and so it's a cup of water, and I told you they are like little magnetic pieces, so I've got some of them here. They're already sticking together. So I think this is a really cool model because it shows the relationship that we were talking about earlier. So on this one water molecule, I would have a hard time removing, I could, but I'd have a hard time removing those hydrogen atoms away from the oxygen. Covalent bond's pretty strong. But now the hydrogen bonds that hold water molecules together, those are relatively weak. So I can pull them apart. I'm not saying there's not any strength to them, but they are much weaker in nature than the polar covalent bonds that are occurring right there and right there. So again, that is a hydrogen bond, which is the attraction between these two water molecules. One water molecule, let me advance this slide right here for us. One water molecule can actually form 4 hydrogen bonds with 4 other water molecules. So I'm going to do that as well here and play around with this cup. And you'll see that I have a structure like what you see. Like what you see on the screen as well. One water molecule can form 4 hydrogen bonds with others. So even though these are weak bonds, there's a heck of a lot of water molecules in a drop of water, which means there are a ton of hydrogen bonds between. So that extra amount of bonds that are taking place really can kind of provide a lot of strength in numbers, high numbers. Okay, moving on to our target. I'm bringing our target back up, and I want to tell you that I'm going to try to do something better this year than I have in the past, and that's including the essential knowledge statements and making sure my students are seeing them and not just me. In the past, I thought maybe that they were a little overwhelming or lengthy to share with students, but now I'm kind of having a change of perspective, and I'm recognizing that they spell out exactly what students should know and be able to do. And so there's no reason to keep them away from you. Even if they're lengthy or overwhelming, if that's what the expectation is, I want to know about it, so you should too. So the essential knowledge statements connected to topic 1.1 are listed here. We'll go through one at a time. And what's really cool is you'll start to notice they aren't like just fact statements about a situation. Instead, they are understood to be factual statements about lots of different situations, like things that statements that apply almost like a theme to different scenarios. And I find that comforting because sometimes in biology there's so much content that the course can feel really wide and really deep at the same time, and some students make a bad decision in feeling like they have to understand every concept. They have to understand every idea that's posed in class. They have to understand every single body system and all of this content. And that's not what's occurring here. Instead, we want to take these essential knowledge statements and see if we can recognize common themes throughout biology. There will absolutely be content we need to know, but do not get into that trap and make that negative decision that you've got to memorize everything, because that is not what this course is about. First essential knowledge statement says the subcomponents. It just means the smaller pieces of biological molecules, and their sequence determines the properties of that molecule. So it's a statement about structure and function. It's just saying the small pieces of molecules and the order that they are sequenced in determine the job that that molecule can do. Okay, the next essential knowledge statement says living systems depend on properties of water that result from its polarity and hydrogen bonding. So living systems are depending on properties, and those properties result from the polarity and hydrogen bonding, another tie between structure and function. And then last but not least, the hydrogen bonds between water molecules result in cohesion, adhesion, surface tension. So this is the direct statement taken from the College Board course exam description, where it absolutely lists those top three. So please keep that in mind, that will be seen throughout the course. Okay, we're going to dive into properties of water first, cohesion and adhesion. First of all, what is it? And then second of all, most importantly, how does it contribute to helping sustain life on Earth? I love this definition of cohesion. It's actually just a picture, but it summarizes it in my mind pretty well. It's water molecules sticking to water molecules. So it's exactly what we see here. It's water molecules sticking to water molecules. That's it. How is that possible? Well, it's possible through hydrogen bonding. Why is the hydrogen bonding possible? Well, because there's a positive end to water molecules, and there's a negatively charged end to water molecules, and that attraction between is what we refer to as a hydrogen bond. Adhesion, what is it? Adhesion is the attraction between water and something else other than itself. So water will adhere to other items. Now, most importantly, how does life depend on these properties? I think these are two good ones to talk about together. Like, I think you can kind of wrap both of them up together if you will choose a plant in your discussion. I strongly suggest when we're going through any kind of pictures, especially on a slideshow, for my students to pause the video and think through the graphic that's being displayed before I provide any kind of reasoning or logic behind why it was placed here, because it gives you an opportunity to practice what you think this picture is telling you, like what story is being told, what are the most important parts of this visual representation, because that'll happen a lot in AP Biology. So I'm going to talk through that now. You pause if you need to, but I'm noticing in this picture that I've got a number 1, a number 2, number 3. That would suggest that something's happening in order, or at least my attention needs to be in order of those boxes. The next thing I notice is the colors. I notice the color of this area is the same as the color down here. It appears that this is almost like a magnified picture of what I would recognize to be a root, and this appears to be a magnified picture of the stem, and then another magnified picture of the leaf. These little blue dots, whatever they are, it looks like they are moving into these red bricks. Now, I'm using really general terms here because I'm showing you can talk yourself through a graphic, even if you don't know what the graphic is at all, and we all are going to recognize this one to be a plant, but looks like it's moving through the red bricks. Now, when I get to picture number 2, I can confirm that hypothesis because I do see these Mickey Mouse looking water structures inside of this red brick. So now I might be thinking, okay, that red brick is like maybe the cells within the stem. So water's moving from the soil up the stem. And then here, well, I see the beginning of that red structure, but it looks a little bit more circular. Like maybe I'm looking at the top of it, like maybe looking down on the top of a straw. And it appears that the blue little dots, or maybe the water molecules, are actually leaving the leaf. And that's exactly what happens through transpiration. So breaking down that picture, how does cohesion and adhesion help sustain life on Earth? How does it help that plant survive? Well, those little conducting tubes, those red brick structures, they're actually called xylem. If you looked at a cross section of a plant, you would see these right here, or at least in some plants that have that vascular tissue. And so this graphic shows it in a little bit more detail, and we're going to hone in on this one portion. We're not going to get overwhelmed with this large picture. Instead, we're just going to stick to that circled piece. Hold on. See if I can get the light to cut back on. Thank you. All right, so I recreated a simplified model to the side. I've got this box representing the xylem, or that conducting tube inside of the stem, and then I've got the cell wall on the side. So what's really happening here? What do I see happening here? That's what I want to continue to ask. Well, it looks like I've got little Mickey Mouse water molecules moving up that plant's stem. And I noticed that they kind of seem to be linked together, and they also seem to be hanging out really close to that cell wall. So those little dots between the water molecules, think back to earlier in the slideshow, that those are showing the hydrogen bonds between water molecules. That is the cohesive force or cohesion in action. And so cohesion occurs as water chains develop, which allows the water to move up or move through the stem together, like almost like magnets pulling one another up. And then adhesion occurs as the water adheres to the inside of the plant stem. So just to recap, cohesion and adhesion both are helpful in sustaining life on Earth. How is that possible? Well, cohesion and adhesion allow water to move up into a plant by creating water chains through cohesion that also stick to the inside of the plant through adhesion. Okay. Moving forward, I think we can check those two off as at least being discussed. That doesn't mean you understand them well. If you can't talk it out, just like I did, and you just say, well, I understand it, I just don't know how to write it down, or I don't know how to say it out loud, then you probably don't understand it as much as you should or would like to. So go back and review if needed. Okay, moving on to surface tension. Totally transparent, I don't have a secondary example for you on surface tension. This is really the only example I know of how surface tension is helpful to life on Earth. So you'll see a little picture of these water-striding insects. I know my fishermen and my ladies who like to fish are familiar with seeing these all over the tops of water, and it looks like they're hanging out on a sheet of plastic, but they're not. It's just the little indentations underneath their feet are showing kind of where they're touching down on that water, and it looks like that thin layer because of all the hydrogen bonds that are occurring between the water molecules that create almost like a little surface film. So that's what we refer to as surface tension. So it allows those water-striding insects to actually land on top of the water. It's also why a belly buster hurts really bad. But please don't talk about belly busters on the AP biology questions, because that does not explain how surface tension is helpful to life on the planet. Next, I love this one. I think this one can go a lot of different directions that you would feel comfortable with. So the next property is that water is a good solvent. A lot of textbooks and notes often refer to water as a universal solvent, and I just don't like to use that phrase because it implies that water can dissolve everything, and it cannot. Some things are soluble or dissolvable in water, and some things are not. Some things are lipid soluble. So water doesn't dissolve everything, but it dissolves a heck of a lot of stuff. So I say it is a good solvent. The solvent right here is the liquid doing the dissolving, and then the solute is the particle that is being dissolved. Here are some examples of things that could be dissolved in water. And underneath each of these electrolytes, it kind of gives you a description of their function in the human body. So like sodium and potassium are really pivotal, I think I made up a word there, pivotal in nervous system function. Now, if you're trying to make a connection here and you're like, well, what does that have to do with water? Like, I know they can dissolve in it. No, our nervous system depends on it. How is that linked together? Well, our blood is mainly composed of water. So our blood is a great solution for these electrolytes to be dissolved and distributed throughout the body everywhere that blood goes. Okay, if you want a little bit more detail into how water dissolves things such as salt, you can kind of freeze frame on this picture and try to make sense of it, and notice the hydration shells and the direction they are forming around the sodium and chloride ions that are the green and yellow balls. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next property of water, which is that it it regulates temperature on Earth pretty well. And so cities that are close to large bodies of water tend to maintain a more stable temperature than cities in the same latitude or the same location on the globe in reference to the equator that are not beside large bodies of water. So test out whether you could select either city A or city B on which one is more likely close to a large body of water. If I look at the data in the table, I notice that city B seems to have a wider range. I mean, 61 to 83 is pretty wide of a range. So there's some up and downs that are occurring, some peaks and valleys. But City A seems to have a tighter range of expected temperatures over these 4 months. The greatest difference is between 66 and 73. It's only varying by 7 degrees. And so City A would be the appropriate response on the one that's most likely beside a large body of water. And I think of San Diego when I think of this topic. San Diego, California has a temperature of almost 70 degrees the entire year. It's really amazing temperature. So even if you go in the middle of what we would call a cold winter, you might be interested to see the plant life there that's available at all times throughout the year, since that temperature does remain relatively stable. Another property of water that's easy to pick up on is that water can regulate temperature not only of the planet, which impacts the organisms living in that portion of the planet, but it can also regulate the temperature of organisms. So when we have excess heat in our bodies, like Michael Jordan here, we might not look as cool when we sweat, but we will also sweat as well. And so that sweat allows, we'll pick up that excess heat from our body, allowing it to escape our body and go to the surface. And then as that sweat evaporates, it causes our bodies to cool off because that heat is taken even further away from our bodies. Okay. Last property of water that's worth discussing is ice floating. That probably sounds like a strange one. It took me a little bit of time to kind of wrap my mind around how this is actually beneficial to life on Earth, that ice floats in my cup. And so it's not really about ice floating in my cup, but more on different parts of the planet where there's huge sheets of ice and liquid water underneath. So if you want to kind of get into why is water floating, we can have that conversation. This picture over here shows liquid water, that the water molecules are relatively tight to one another. But on the second picture right here, on the ice, you'll notice that the water molecules are spaced out further apart from one another. The angles of those hydrogen bonds have changed. And so you still have the same amount of water, the same number of water molecules, but they are further away from one another. So the mass didn't change, but the volume did. The volume increased. And so if you increase volume without increasing mass, you're making the object less dense, and so that's why it's popping up. So anyways, that's why it's popping up. Now, how is it helpful to life on Earth? Because that's really the key focus for us as AP Biology students. And so the fact that when water freezes, when those temperatures get really cold on the planet and water freezes, it allows the ice to pop up to the top of the water, allowing the organisms found below that layer to remain in their aquatic environment, or at least until a fisherman pulls them out, for example, like you see in this picture. So there is a lot of life that's able to continue to exist underneath that frozen sheet of ice, because the fact that ice floats. Okay, if you go back through your target, test yourself out. Can you explain how cohesion and adhesion are helpful to sustaining or helping something survive on Earth? Can you explain how surface tension could allow something to sustain life on Earth? What about a good solvent? Are you going to select that one? Are you more comfortable with talking about temperature regulation of a portion of the planet versus temperature regulation of an organism? And then ice floating, are you going to choose that to be the one that you want to talk about? If you can talk about all of them, then you're prepared for anything. Again, expectation for us is that everybody is good with cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension on being able to talk that one out in a verbal or written format. And then you should have a fourth one of your choice to be able to write about. And then just be familiar with the others as well, so that you could work your way through some multiple choice items if the topic came up, because I think it's good for students to have that exposure as well. I hope this topic has been helpful to you in preparing for being proficient in topic 1.1, the structure of water and hydrogen bonding. And this screencast was made with you in mind. I hope you have a great day, and go Big O.